say, Chris Hecker, SpyParty. What the
fuck? Thank you. Yes, so I'm Chris Hecker, and indeed the title of my talk, if I can get the focus in the right place, is indeed so SpyParty like WTF. And the idea behind that is obviously I've been in development for a really long time, and I want to talk about like some of the pros and cons of that, and like what it means both financially and psychologically in a whole bunch of different ways. But I came up with a really handy visualization for how long I've actually been working on SpyParty, a kind of graphic thing that really drives the point home. So SpyParty was developed, was started at an Indie Game Jam 3, which was the 4th Indie Game Jam because we started at 0. And this is 2005. And there's Heim Gingold, Thatcher Ulrich, me and my, at the time, 2-year-old daughter. There at the jam. So I didn't actually get the prototype running, which is great because I realized I could work on it more, and it was a bigger game than just a jam game, and that's a whole other story. But I just wanted to show that that's when SpyParty started, and here's what the kid looks like now. She's 11. Now, to be fair, this kind of gives a kind of like height and weight-based description of the actual amount of time we're talking about here. To be fair, that I didn't start full time until she looked like this. She was 6, so it's not quite the 2-year-old thing. It's not exactly fair, but so to be a little more specific, so 2005 it was a jam. So you have to spend 4 straight days working on something, and I was one of the organizers of the Indie Game Jam, so I didn't really get that much time to spend working on it. And I suck at jams from a actually getting work done standpoint, which we're going to talk about later. I'm very slow. But so, there's more than full time in 2005 for a very brief moment, and then nothing. And then in 2008, while I was working on Spore, which we'll talk about a little bit more, I negotiated an exemption to my IP agreement with EA that allowed me to work on the game in my spare time. I couldn't use EA equipment, and I couldn't sell it or anything like that, but it was really cool of them because I was a little frustrated working on Spore after all those years of not being able to have, there were too many design cooks in the kitchen, and so I didn't want to make it worse. And so I started working on SpyParty. I was like, oh, that game I tried to make at the Indie Game Jam was really cool. Let me try and play around with that. And then when they laid me off in 2009, I went full-time on it. So that's full-time and into the indefinite future. Now, if we go back to the comparison, the effort expended on Clementine, my daughter, probably looks a little bit like this because, there's a dip after they learn to feed themselves and clothe themselves and bathe themselves. But then I'm thinking as she's heading towards teenagerness that the workload's going to really increase for me. So just as a comparison. So let's actually, I resurrected the old prototype, which is called SniperParty, and this is what it looked like. And so what I did, once I started working on it in 2008, in an hour here or there every week, I got this together working, and so when I told Will Wright about this idea when I was on Spore, he's like, oh, that'll never work, because it's going to be too easy to tell who the spy is. Because it's really easy for humans to tell the difference between computers and humans. And so what I did is I made this app where I can control one of these people, and then I just frapsed it. Like there's no sniper camera, there's no missions, there's no nothing. I just walked around the room and sent the video to like 6 or 8 friends, and no one could even tell who I was. Now, once I resurrected this, yesterday, I realized that I didn't make the turning frame rate independent, and so the computers are 5 times faster now. So she it's a little more obvious now which person is the actual spy, but. But I wanted to show this because I think it's kind of interesting. This actually looked better than the game for a little while because if you notice, these are actually Sims assets. We had permission for IGJ3 from EA to use the Sims 1 assets. So we ripped all the CDs and contractually we were allowed to do this. So this was filled with Sims assets. But once I started working on the game for real, I actually had to tear all that out. So that's SniperParty from 2005/2008. And then here's what the game looks like now. So it doesn't all look like this. This is the new art that's coming in. But you can see she's checking her watch on a cell phone. These are the new art characters, which we'll talk about in a little bit. They look better than the Sims characters did. There's a guy in a wheelchair, playable. There's a really great diversity. You can see the security guard and the waiter are still old art characters. There's only 10 new art characters right now. So if you come out, you can still see Yes, she's got. Oh, you want? If you here's an interesting thing about her. Let me go in here. I'll pick her as the spy. She has a dog in her purse. And I was kind of struggling with this whole idea of, and she'll pet the dog and stuff, and I was struggling with this whole idea of like, I can't let people shoot the dog, that's just uncool. I mean, shooting people, that's totally fine, who cares about that, right? But, and so I was like, I came up with this solution, which is that if the dog ducks in the purse, which is of course a bulletproof purse, all standard spy issue. So you can't actually shoot the dog. It's the little things that matter. All right, anyway, I was going to show you that some of the competition maps, like the game is kind of an e-sporty game. Like, so here's that map, basically, I mean, heavily modified version of this map that you saw in that picture. You can still play this map, and it's a competition-worthy map. Like, people play this in the ladder and stuff because it's very tuned and balanced. And this is all the old art. So this will all eventually be replaced by the new art, but there's currently only 2 new art levels. All right. So that's the A/B of before-after to show that I actually have done some work. So let's talk about what we're going to talk about. So there's going to be 3 topics. I had to cut down, 5 or 9 years, depending on how you measure it, into 1 hour. And so we're going to talk about fatigue of various sorts, money of various sorts, and the plan going forward. And we're going to talk about this through the lens of a whole bunch of different disciplines, kind of being a little bit sloppy: production design, financial, business, marketing, PR, community, that kind of thing. But let's start out with the F word, fatigue. So if you're on a long-term project, this is one of your big fears, is fatigue. And there's a bunch of different kinds of fatigue. There's developer fatigue, meaning you getting tired of working on it. There's player fatigue, of which there's a couple different kinds, and then there's press fatigue. So I'm going to go into each one in a little bit of detail and kind of talk about the way I see fatigue for each of these different categories of people. So here's me and John Cimino, the artist who's doing all the new awesome art. So this is me, obviously. I'm the one who doesn't iron my shirts, and this is John. And so first I'm going to talk about, and we actually deal with fatigue completely differently, and so I'm going to talk about how we both deal with it, mostly about how I deal with it, and then how I deal with John potential fatigue, since as the person who's kind of running the project, I have to worry about that stuff. So for me, I'm a little weird. So I was on this game Spore. I was on Spore for 6 years, and I was not the longest person on Spore. I had to pick a creature to use as my thing. I thought about picking this creature, but I figured that's. So by the end of Spore, so I was on Spore from 2003 to 2009, and we shipped in 2008. By the end of Spore, most people were ready to kill themselves, like on the team. And I was like, no, we got to make this game better. I had no problem working another 6 years on that game if I felt like it could have made it the game that it had the potential to be. And that's just something weird about me. Oh, wait, sorry. I don't know why, but I have this thing. Will has this idea of superpowers and super weaknesses that people have. Like, everybody has got their superpower and super weakness, and it's different for every person. So one of my superpowers is that I have what I call infinite project endurance. I don't know why. I mean, this is obviously not for boring stuff. Like, I did my taxes this week finally. I don't know if October 15th is the last possible second you can do your taxes. So I put them off, and it's not like I like boring things, but for a game like Spore that had the potential to be incredibly interesting, or SpyParty, which I think has the potential to be incredibly interesting, I just don't get bored with it for whatever reason. So I can go forever. The flip side of that is not just a positive. The flip side is that I have severe productivity problems. I have really bad ADD. There's a whole bunch of stuff I struggle with. And when I was thinking about this talk and thinking about how to talk about this stuff, I realized it's not like, there's a little bit of a narcissism thing, like, oh, let me tell you about all my psychological problems. But it was interesting because there's been a bunch of talks recently about how hard it is to make games as an individual. And specifically, Matt Gilgenbach gave a really great talk at the IGS a few years ago about his OCD and making Retrograde and how hard it was and how it almost ruined his marriage and ruined his health and all of these things. And he actually made a game about some of his stuff that's just recently shipped on Steam called Never Ending Nightmares. And it's just a really wonderful talk. And what it made me think about is that everybody's got different problems. Like, my problems and Matt's problems are just completely different. And all of you, I'm sure, have your own problems. If you don't, you're lucky and I hate you. But I don't think it's that valuable to know how I try and work around my productivity issues or whatever, because it's going to be very personal to you. But knowing that other people do have problems and that it's really hard for everybody, I think is valuable. But so let's talk about John. who does not have the same productivity issues that I have, but probably also doesn't have the infinite project endurance thing that I have. First off, the first thing you do when you're making a talk is you Google image search whatever is on your slide. And so this is the Google image search for John Cimino. None of these people are actually John Cimino. However, this guy's got a really ripped six-pack here, and so I'm sure that John would really appreciate it. In fact, there's multiple dudes who are pretty ripped on this page, not all the same guy. This is actually John Cimino and his girlfriend Alice. And one of the reasons they're working at PAX, working in the SpyParty booth at PAX this year. And one of the interesting things about Alice, not only, I'll talk about her salesmanship later, but also we needed a young Asian woman to be in the game, and John was like, oh, I have one of those. So Alice is actually in the game as a playable character. And so people at PAX would come up, and she'd go like this, and they'd be like, whoa. So we were at PAX, and just kind of anecdotal talking about developer fatigue for John. I was at PAX, and PAX, if you've ever done a trade show before, it's incredibly brutal. So for PAX West, or Prime, what I'm talking about is at the end of the summer. So basically, you lose your whole summer crunching if you've got really aggressive goals. You might take a couple weeks in the beginning of the summer because you know the end of the summer is just you're doomed. Booth duty itself is exhausting. They extended PAX from 3 to 4 days a couple years ago, and that's just like at the end of 3 days you're ready to die, and at the end of 4 days, like just the idea of even going for the fourth day, you're just on your feet the whole time. Now, PAX is actually nothing compared to EVO, where PAX has a pretty civilized trade show floor hours. It's 10 to 6 basically. There's one day that opens at 9. But at EVO, it starts at 8 a.m. and goes till midnight for 3 days in a row. And John and I, when we worked at EVO one time, didn't actually know this, and so we get there, we're like, oh, what time should we be here tomorrow? There's, oh, we should open at 8. Oh, cool. And then it's going and going. We're like, what time's it close? Like 12. Like 12 noon? No, midnight. We usually kick people out. So we were there for, what is that? I mean, is that 14 hours? 16 hours? It's insane. So anyway, so PAX is not that, but it's still pretty grueling. And it's also crazy expensive. You spend a lot of money on the booth, on the TVs, on the flights, on the hotels, and all of this stuff. And so I asked John at PAX this year, what did you think? Well, I mean, do you think it's worth it? Because I was really struggling with whether it's worth it to do these things. Anecdotally, or not anecdotally, but as an aside, this is the Behemoth booth in the background here, and I don't know if you can see behind Alice here is this pile of plastic bags with this pile of swag bags here. They ordered 17,000 swag bags that were supposed to not be bagged, but they came individually bagged. And so John Baez and Dan Paladin and the rest of the Behemoth team had to manually unbag 17,000 bags the day before PAX. They filled like basically a dump truck full of bags. We didn't have to do that. We just had to use some X-Acto knives. But I asked John, I said, okay, what do you think of PAX? Do you think it's worth it? And he said, oh, definitely. Even though he works hard and crunches and loses the summer and all these things, he's like having the firm, aggressive deadline of getting some big chunk of game done, like getting the new art in or a new level or some big thing. In this case, also selling the game. Tons of positive feedback. I mean, he spends 3 days of the week by himself in his room in his apartment in San Francisco, and then 2 days of the week at my office, garage office. And so his feedback is from the fans, and he's not that active on the forums or anything like that, so he doesn't get that much feedback from the fans. So being at PAX where someone will come up and like, oh my god, the game looks so awesome, I'll be like, oh well, it's his fault. And they'll go over and talk to him and want his autograph and the whole 9 yards. It's super great for him. Especially for artists, I think, positive feedback. I mean, everybody loves positive feedback, and I think especially for visual artists, it seems to, all the ones I've known, it's really important, and so it's a super great thing there. And also, selling the game is fun. He really liked the idea of closing that loop. Like, he's been working on this thing, and then someone handed him $20 for 2 copies of it or whatever. Like, that's a really cool, physical, manifestation of the value of his work in some sense. It's, in some sense, John is the perfect game artist for SpyParty because he's an amazing character artist and concept artist and animator. And in some sense, SpyParty is the perfect game for John. There's very few games that have this many people in them, of normal people, wacky, kind of characters and stuff like that. But at the same time, he did start in September of 2011. So this has already been 3 years just for him. And, and it's not necessarily his baby in the same way that it's my baby. So, and he doesn't ever necessarily have that same crazy endurance thing. So I do slightly worry about it. I try and make sure I check in with him often. I try to make sure that he's working on interesting things. We've set up his work so that he batches the characters in 5, so he's always doing something new and different. It isn't just grinding out ZBrush for 20 characters and then grinding out Maya for 20 characters. And I change around the way that we integrate stuff in so that to keep him working the way he wants to. But still, it's a concern. So I want to move on to player fatigue, and there's two kinds of player fatigue here. There's current players, meaning people who've already paid $15 and are players of SpyParty, and then there's potential players, and they're very different kinds of fatigue, or different kinds of players, and they have different kinds of fatigue and the ramifications of there. So let's talk about current players first. So there's two kinds of fatigue that happen within the current players. New players tend to bounce off SpyParty really quickly. I don't actually even gather metrics yet, but it's pretty obvious just from looking at it that players will come on, play a few games, and then put it away. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why this is. The new user experience is terrible. I don't know if you've seen this comic. I'm sure you all saw it from the early 2000s of the various learning curves of MMORPGs, and the top one is EVE Online, and SpyParty's a lot like EVE. In that sense, it's like there's no tutorial, there's no easing you in, you don't like unlock powers as you're going. It's just like you're thrown into this esport level competitive insanity instantly. Now, luckily, the community is awesome, as I'll talk about in a little bit. But even that, like you're just, it's ugly, the UI is terrible, like a whole bunch of things. So a lot of this gives me hope that this kind of fatigue, the fact that, it's hard to even call it fatiguing, it's more like it's bouncing. They're not even like tired of the game, they're just like, they play it and then bounce. I think it's measurable and fixable, and I think these people come back. And I need to start gathering more metrics once I'm ready to actually start fixing this problem. It's like, I just did 2 weeks of optimizations and made huge performance benefits, but I hadn't like really spent that much time timing the game before that, and I was like, okay, this is a problem now, and now I'm gonna gather metrics and fix it. So I've got all the data, I just haven't actually gathered the metrics, I haven't actually like processed it. But I'm pretty sure this is measurable and fixable, this kind of bouncing, the funnels and all that stuff that you hear about free play games and stuff like that. For a game, these people are obviously interested enough to pay $15 for the game. They want to play the game, and there's just something that's preventing them from doing it. So that's one kind of current player fatigue. The one that I'm actually more concerned about is this one, which is because of the long development cycle. So I'm doing this thing that I call depth first, accessibility later, which is basically stolen from Blizzard. Rob Pardo gave a talk about it. Basically, I'm going as deep as I can on the design of the game first, making it as hardcore as possible, and then I'll make it accessible later. And this is kind of the opposite of what Spore did. Spore kind of did an accessibility first, depth never kind of design methodology, which just doesn't work very well if the end result is that you want is a deep game. And so the problem is someone will come in, say last year or something, and they'll play 200 hours of my game. They'll play 10,000 games of my game, which is amazing. That's so awesome. I'm so honored that someone wants to spend that much time, playing my game, and I'm really lucky that the game is deep enough to support that kind of play. But then they'll want to move on. Hey, they played 200 hours of my game for $15. There's no universe in which I can complain about these players. They're just awesome. But at the same time, when they fade away, they're taking a whole ton of institutional learning with them. They're taking strategies. Like the game is varied enough in play style that there are individuals who have certain strategies that no one else plays like. And so there's a lot of value that leaves with these players, and I don't mean like monetary value. I mean like there's just this they're part of the family that happens, and I don't know what to do about this one. Like these are the kind of people that I think that the first category will come back when I announce new art or new maps or those kinds of things. They don't want to sample the game again. They might be a little more casual or whatever. The hardcore players have played the game. They really get it at a very deep level. I've got a bunch more hardcore game design stuff I'm going to do, and then people might come back in and sample for that. But I don't feel like those people are going to come back for another 100 hours. We've had a couple examples where they do, but for the most part, they come around, they hang around the forums, they chat for old time's sake, but they don't ever start playing the exact same way again. So this is actually, I think, one downside of really long development if you're trying to make a deep esporty kind of replayable game, which is you will burn through the really hardcores depending on how long you're going. And it's a little bit concerned. I'm not sure what to do about this one. Again, I'm just honored they want to play that much of the game, and I'm hoping they'll come back. But it is a concern. Okay, so now let's talk about potential player fatigue, and this is the one that people think about the most when they talk about oh my God, your game's been in development for a long time. Because guess what? When you look at the comments sections, which everyone says don't read the comments, but everyone who's making a game reads the comments. How could you not? They write about your game, and then you want to see what people say. They're like, oh my God, so how many times do I have to hear about this game? Or and it's different in every different. It'll be different on one website versus another website. There's a kind of vibe or kind of attitude that kind of evolves in different websites. So it might be different on NeoGAF versus Kotaku versus Joystick versus Reddit. And so here, some people are going man, it's been so long. How can you even, how are you even doing this? How come no one's stolen this idea? Blah, blah, blah. Oh my gosh, you imported a model. We should post a news item about it. They're mocking me and the reporters and whatever. And I dove in sometimes, in this case, I was like, well, here, correct this, or yeah, you're right, it's taking a long time in this way. But the question is, how much of a problem is this? Some people like to complain about the internet, complain on the internet. That is a thing apparently. But also, you want to take information for what it's worth. You know, and you want to take it at face value. Like, these people are complaining about it. They obviously have an issue. But there's a little bit of a mitigating factor that is called the Cheng infinity hypothesis that I'm going to go into here in a second. This is Jamie Cheng. He runs Clay, which is the back then when this picture was taken, they had shipped Shank. This is what he looks like after they shipped Don't Starve. So, I don't know, I mean, a little more grizzled, more fabulous hair though. So like, you know, shipping gazillion units of a game, it also makes you black and white apparently. So the Cheng infinity hypothesis is this. It's this idea that at indie scale, which means basically like less than 1 million copies, right? If an indie sells 1 million copies, they're done. Like, that is so much money, it's not even funny. You can make games the rest of your life, you can support your whole family, like you're fine if you're making 1 million copies, if you sell 1 million copies. I mean, maybe not a 99% iPhone game, but for a $10 or a $20, you know, PC or console game. And the thing is, at the indie scale, we're talking about 1 million copies or less, and even way less than 1 million copies is hugely valuable. There are infinite customers, practically speaking. And so, you can't prove this, but here are 2 anecdotes that, and I firmly believe in the Cheng infinity hypothesis. Here are 2 anecdotes. So Tom Francis, a delightful human being and the maker of Gunpoint and is now working on Heat Signature, a few weeks ago tweeted this series of tweets. He's like, I know, through the Gunpoint account, I know it can feel like everyone has it by now, but here's an interesting stat. To the nearest percent, and Steam had just released their latest active players thing, which is 100 million active users, 0% of Steam users own Gunpoint. That's how big Steam is. You can live in the 0%. Quote, that's correct. My business plan is to make a PC game that basically sells to that 100% of PC gamers don't buy, and then quit my job. And it's true. It's totally possible. And it's because of this idea of, at this scale, there's just an infinite number of people on the internet now who are interested in games. My second anecdote is PAX for SpyParty. Now, knock on wood, we always have a line at the booth in SpyParty, and I await the PAX where we don't have a line, and I'm terrified of it. But luckily, so far, we've always had a line, and I am incredibly grateful. Now, a couple things. Like, I don't think many people would argue with the fact that SpyParty has a lot of hype for an indie game. Like, I mean, you know, I don't know how you rank it relative to other games, but it's a hugely well-known game for an indie game. But anecdotally, the majority of people who come to the PAX booth that I talk to have never even heard of the game, or have only heard about it that weekend when their friend said, oh, you gotta go check out this wacky game I saw in the corner. So even a game with as much press as SpyParty has gotten, as much attention and awareness that SpyParty has, basically no one's ever heard of it before. And I'm going to talk about this whole no one knows about your game thing and everything like this. But as far as the Cheng infinity hypothesis goes, here's another part of that. This year, I gather metrics on how many people play the game at PAX and how many games are played. Excuse me. So there are 1,104 games played this year. Now, usually what happens is 2 people sit down, get trained to play the game, and then play 2 games. So 2 people play 2 games, so it's basically 1-to-1. But there are, because of the way I want the game to be, I want people to be able to discover the depth. I don't want just everyone just to be newbies coming in all the time. I have 2 machines set aside for what are called, it's called the unlimited machine, whereas you can just camp on that machine and no one can kick you off. So you can play, so there's actually, the number of people who played is lower than 1,100 basically. Because some people play 20 games on the unlimited machine before they left or whatever. Some people camped there for 4 hours some days. I sold copies of the game for the first time ever. I printed up these really cool little cards with QR codes and the characters on them and everything. I sold 540 copies of the game. Now, if you think about that, that's a 50% conversion rate. Now, that's just a totally bullshit number because, like, a lot of people bought the game to not stand in line, and so it's not the same people necessarily, but it's a huge number relative to the number of people who were exposed to the game by playing it. And what that says to me is that there are so many people out there and so many niches that if you can just get your game in front of people and show them what it is, you will you have customers. And so I think there's another aspect of the Cheng infinity hypothesis that goes along with Tom Francis's. And so it's hard to not worry about potential player fatigue because man, you go onto a forum or something like that, and you see the people complaining about the fact that you've heard about this game 1 million times. But at the same time, I think it's best to not worry about it and just try and make the best game you can possibly make. I also kind of like live in hope of the fact that this whole like fetishism of the new will go away or at least fade a bit once games kind of transition from products to works of art and entertainment. Like, there's a whole idea that, like, if it's less than a week, if it's more than a week old, no one cares about it. I think that happens in other art and entertainment forms, but I don't think it's quite as bad as it is in games right now. And so I hope, and not just for me, because I have an old game, basically, at this point, even though it's not finished. I think that it's a sad thing that you'll see people talk, someone will suggest a game, or you'll suggest a game to the press, and they'll be like, oh yeah, that shipped a couple weeks ago, we're not interested in covering it anymore. And that's just a bummer. And I think it's related to this player fatigue thing. It's kind of the self-fulfilling thing. Okay, so press fatigue. So this one actually I think is real, and is a real problem for a game of the development cycle as long as SpyParty. And part of that is because the press is definitely finite. There's no Cheng infinity hypothesis for press. There's a finite number of big publications. There's a finite number of YouTubers. I mean, there's an infinite number of YouTubers. There's a finite number of above a level where you can actually get, a ton of attention on your game from. There's bloggers and things like that, but there's a much more finite number of those people than there are customers. And so when I got some pushback, so I do, part of the way I get press is that I say things, I try to do the right thing in terms of like talk to people at the right moments when I'm announcing something big and like, have some level of exclusivity with an interview and things like that and assets and all the kind of like, grown-up PR stuff that you have to learn to do when you're trying to make a big indie game. And like, and I got some pushback on one of the recent ones that I did. So we did the 5, we're doing the characters, the new characters in batches of 5. And we announced those, and that got a lot of coverage. But then the previous time when we did the first animating versions of the first batch, we got a ton of coverage for. And the animations of the second batch did not get as much coverage, and I in fact got some pushback from some press people who have been long-time fans of the game and stuff. And so I bookmarked that and thought, okay, I'm thinking about doing this IndieCade, proposing this IndieCade talk, and I want to talk to these people about what's changed, what's the difference, what is the, I want to talk about this fatigue thing. So I actually interviewed some press people, and I'm gonna go through some of their, I've paraphrased, some of them are quotes, but I've mostly paraphrased this long conversation I had with some press people. One of the really interesting things they said was something can be interesting but not worth running. And I think it's really hard for indies to understand that. They're finite, time is finite. In fact, this goes with this one, which is that like they have to pay the bills, it's a business. And I don't mean this in some like weird conspiratorial, like you have to pay to get coverage or anything like that. What I mean is like they have a finite amount of stuff and people are interested, their readers have certain interests and they need to cover the stuff that those readers are interested in, and that leaves a certain amount left over for other stuff to cover. But but they have a ton of responsibility to their readers to actually cover stuff that they're interested in. So even if they're indie game fans, they have to find a balance that is happy. Now, I think that press can lead a little bit more than they can just follow, but even given that, they still have to pay the bills. They have to keep the lights on. And I don't think this is a clickbait thing or anything weird like that. This is just a human nature business thing. This is an interesting thing. They basically said that there's a stigma on the word indie now. Like, it's not a positive thing. They don't, like, using indie in a headline is not a positive thing for an article. It's like you don't want it necessarily for your game. I thought that was really interesting. Like, it's not, you don't want to press the indiness of your game anymore. And then they gave me some, like, expectation setting stuff. For a year-ish project, which we're talking about, I talk about the SpyParty aspect of some of this on the next slide. But for a normal, like, quote-unquote normal project where you're lasting a year, you can basically expect 2 announcements. You got your announcement and your trailer, and then your release announcement. And you shouldn't go in expecting any more press than that. Now, you might come up with something that's worth coverage, but don't expect it. That's probably all you can expect. And they know it's unfair. They know they would like to cover more stuff like this. They know that you can go, what I said was like one of the examples I was like, I go to your website right now, and there's 9 articles on Destiny weapon loadouts and skin painting, and one indie article, or one article about, something that's a little more, there's a little less fan service, and they're like, they know it's unfair. I mean, that's what people want to read about, and that's kind of how it is to pay the bills. They do want you to keep in touch even if they don't print it. And this was a kind of like, it's not surprising, but it's one of those things where it's like, I was kind of bummed after this latest batch because I had such good luck getting coverage before, and I was kind of surprised that it was a little bit harder this time. But it still was it's building up their model of how the game's coming along, and it's still important. So don't have an expectation of a post every time you mail them, and don't be upset And this gets to this one, which is they're more likely to work with folks who understand it's a two-way business relationship, right? It's like, I've got a game, I want them to cover it because I think it's a cool game and I want people to know about it. They've got a site and they want to cover stuff that they think is cool for their site. But those aren't always going to mesh. And it's business. It's like, I mean, there's fans, they like your game, they like games in general, they want to help push interesting and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, like, it's business, and if you come away from that snotty and bitchy and posting on Twitter about how you can't get coverage for your thing, that's just not, why would they want to work with you anymore? Like, it's just like, ooh, that's just like not something you want to be involved with. They do want more weird indie pitches. They straight up said this to me, like they would love more weird indie pitches. And there's another thing which is like kind of seems unfair, which is part of the unfairness, which is like we play X, so it naturally gets more coverage, you know? Like, I mean, you can see on RPS, for example, like, somebody there loves Prison Architect, so every damn, like, you know, update that Prison Architect does gets an article out of them. And that's great for Prison Architect, and you can't, like, it's just because the person really loves Prison Architect and they think it's cool and they want to write cool stuff about it. That's fine, it's just the way it works. So it's not something to be bitter about, it's just kind of the way the world works. It's not in any way a bad thing, it's just human nature. So then I asked about SpyParty specifically. One person said, to use your game as an example, incremental changes aren't that interesting, right? And this gets to that whole, like, they have to think about, and you have to think when you're pitching to them, what is going to be interesting to their readers. So I might make a change that's a huge change for SpyParty fans that no one who hasn't played the game for 10 or 50 hours is going to give a shit about. So that's an important thing, obviously. Quote, you are not getting shit until it comes out. So this is from someone who had posted like maybe 6 articles over the past 3 or 4 years on the game, and they're like, all right, you need to ship. And then so I was like, oh, ouch. And then, you know, we're going on. It's like a couple-hour conversation. We're going on, and they're like, well, I mean, when you put it on Steam Early Access, we'll probably cover that. And they're like, or I mean, if you make a really cool video, that might get posted. Or, you know, if it says something about what some current conversation happening in games, like my game has a lot to say about diversity and things like that, or, you know, examples like that. So it's clear that even though they have like a kind of built-in like just human nature bias, like, oh man, we covered this game to death, like, stop, they're still looking for interesting angles. Like, they're not actually not going to publish anything about SpyParty if I do my job right, which is make interesting things. Like, if I make an interesting game, that then interesting things come from. Even though I'm definitely on the shit list in terms of, I mean, these are all friends of mine, like in the sense of colleagues, but they're all like, no way, we're not publishing, you know, your random press release coverage of your game anymore until you do some big thing. But a ton of people posted the wacky videos when I did some optimizations and screwed up the skin weighting system, and all the people distorted like Cthulhu. Like, that got a ton of press. So it's like coming up with angles for doing it. It's even for a long-term game like SpyParty, it's not impossible. It's just harder. And I think actually it's getting harder for everybody. So I gave a talk a long time ago at the IGS in 2011 where I talked about the common, this is back in the, like, I analyzed like, you know, Braid and Castle Crashers and World of Goo and a bunch of games like that, these kind of AAA indie games back then. And the big common denominator about their way they did their marketing is this, what I call the long-term, slow-burn, grassroots awareness building campaign. Basically, like, kind of what I've been doing on SpyParty, like, talk early and often about the game. You know, you've got all your channels and Twitter and social, and, you know, and Facebook and all this stuff, and press. You get press interested in the game, and you get them playing it and see what the cool sides are. You make sure you're making an interesting game. But this is getting harder. One piece of feedback was this whole like drip feed of news is they're not as interested in publishing that kind of thing anymore. There's way more indie games out there. We all know this based on the Steam stats and stuff, you know, 20 games released a day and that kind of thing. But this is getting harder, and so I don't think it's impossible, but it definitely is getting harder. And so it's I mean, I'm very lucky because I got a big burst of, a big critical mass of press early, but it's going to be harder for me to keep going on, and it's harder for new games as well. Okay, so let's move on to how on earth can you afford to make this game, since I've been working for so long. So there's some facts we need to remember here when we talk about this. Fact number 1, I'm old. And so what does that mean? I turned 44 this year, so I'm not as old as some people in this room, but I'm old. But I'm old, and what does that mean? I don't mean, it does mean my back hurts more than it used to, and soft tissue injuries take a lot longer to heal. But the most important thing that it means for germane to this discussion is that I've been working professionally since 1993. So I've been able, and I live really cheaply, so I've saved a ton of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, by just working as a professional programmer since Nights for 20 years. That matters. That makes it so that I can do a game like SpyParty that's really expensive. 2, people buy the game. It's an early access game. a lot of games aren't applicable to early access. I've kind of categorized 3 kinds of games that work in early access, or 3 characteristics. There's online competitive multiplayer, right? That's what I'm in. There's procedural generated content, something like Splunky, or there's UGC, user generated content, something like Spore Creature Creator or Minecraft. In fact, Minecraft has 2 of these. Games that have at least one of these characteristics can work in early access. A game like The Witness would never work in early access. It's like a spoiled, a story game, a puzzle game that's not done yet is just a crappy puzzle game. So like that's not true for SpyParty. I might have one map that's really awesome. I need to add more maps and more mechanics. It's just a totally different thing. And so people can buy the game. That's huge, as you'll see how huge that is to taking a chunk out of my burn in a second. And 3, I'm just really lucky. Like, you have to just admit this. Like, I'm very lucky in a whole bunch of different ways that I try and acknowledge clearly. And so we'll talk about some of those in a second here. So, very rough financials. The biggest expense is John's salary. I pay him he's a AAA game artist, and I pay him a AAA game salary out of my savings. That hurts a lot. I wanted to, he's the best artist in the game industry, in my opinion. Like, he's amazing. He's like multi-talented. He's perfect for the game. His level of style and his animation talent and all of this stuff is perfect. And I wanted him. And I worked with him on Spore. I'm really hard to work with, and I knew we could work together. And that's what I got to do. I need to eat, and I have a kid. That also is important. Trade shows, equipment, all that stuff is expensive. I'm estimating that I have spent over $400,000, but probably less than $600,000 on SpyParty so far. I don't actually know the exact number, and I'm totally uninterested in knowing the exact number. So how is this possible? Well, I've sold 14,000 copies of the game. It's not on Steam yet or anything like that. It's just on my website. So that's 190K right there. That takes a chunk out of it. It doesn't pay for it, but it's certainly not nothing. I didn't go to college. I went to Parsons and dropped out. Sorry, it was long before your time. And so I had a family college fund that I never spent, and basically, hey, that plus 20 years is, hey, there's $100,000 I can spend on this game. So that's cool. Very lucky for that. A lot of people don't have access to that kind of thing. A lot of people aren't working on games that can be early access compatible, and there's a whole bunch of luck and choices associated here that I'm just that I'm relying on. And then I've been spending savings, and so whatever the actual number is minus that 190 plus about 100K is savings and stock. I've sold all my Electronic Arts stock at a huge loss. Thank you very much, John Riccatello. My ESPP I bought at 45 and I sold it all at 17, which means I don't pay taxes on it, so that's at least something. I'm selling my Microsoft stock, which was, I was at Microsoft from 93 to 96, which was the time when you were there, if you were there for 5 years, you were a millionaire, but I left after 3 years because I wanted to make these fucking indie games, which is idiotic. So I don't have millions of dollars, but I had a couple $100,000, and Microsoft stock has done well, and so I've been selling that. I still have 140 or so left of that I can go for, that's going to keep us going through the end of the game, hopefully, or part of it. And then savings, just cash. I don't spend a lot of money. I have a really nice living situation where my mortgage is very cheap because my ex-wife, we had 2 houses, and I took the cheaper house because I was going indie, and she was a real estate genius, and so my mortgage is incredibly cheap in California. I mean, I still have to, you go to the grocery store in California, it's $100 for 2 days worth of food, so I still spend a ton of money, but I have it basically optimal as far as living in California can go. So I'm very lucky on those fronts. But I'm basically all in on SpyParty. You can make a choice when you've got that kind of money. You can send your kid to college, or you can make an indie game, and I chose to make an indie game. So we'll see what happens. So the current daily sales are not paying for the burn rate, but they're close. And so I need to increase the current daily sales a little bit. I'm lucky that it's close. It's not 0, which would be, then you don't even know how far you are from it. So I'm a couple X out, but in pretty low numbers. And so I have some options. I can increase the sales. That's the one I prefer, because then I don't have to then I don't owe anybody anything. I'm just making the game I want to make. I can get more money from somebody. I'm going to go into these. I can go on Steam Early Access, and I can scope the game. All right, so we're going to talk about each one of these in order. I'm not going to go into these in detail, but increasing the sales is the one I prefer, because it just, part of the reason I'm doing SpyParty the way I'm doing it is control. I want to make exactly the game I want, and by being able to increase the sales, and not having to be dependent on anyone else, it allows me to keep doing that. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff that I just wasn't basically paying attention to sales for a long time, like in the sense of I was selling the game. I'm very happy to sell the game. I love having players in the game, but I wasn't doing like 2-for-1 deals like the Frozen Synapse guys did and stuff like that. And that worked at gangbusters at PAX. Like 99% of the sales at PAX took advantage of the discount on 2 because hey, it's a 2-player game, duh. So I should probably get that on the website, right? I mean, just stupid stuff like that I'm just like low-hanging fruit. And then there's huge stuff like single player. Like what am I gonna do about that? Look, Frank, I put high-level gameplay arcs in there for you. The update cadence, like Clay introversion, they're really good. Juiced Geronimo just posted a really good blog post on about Awesomenauts update cadence and what optimal update cadence is. I'm terrible at that. My productivity and my lack of production skills are so bad that it makes it really hard for me to do predictable updates, and that's a really important thing for increasing sales. So. And stickiness. And so streams and videos, I just started a Twitch show at 10 a.m. on Tuesdays, 10 a.m. Pacific, called Tuesdays at 10 on Twitch. It's really, but they promoted to the front page because they're really pro-indie. And so, you know, I had 791 people watching the stream the other day, like on Tuesday. That's great. Like Twitch is super awesome for that. And so just a whole bunch of stuff like that, expectational, increased stickiness in the lobby. I want to do these, and I'm hoping that some combination of these will get the number so that I'm in the black, and then I get infinite runway. And that's what I want, because I want to be able to make the game exactly how I want it, and the infinite runway is kind of important to that, given how slow I am. Okay. The second option there is to get more money. I really hope I don't have to do this. There's investors, indie fund. You know, I know a bunch of rich people for being 44 years old in tech for a long time. I could probably borrow some more money from my family. Again, luck that I can do that. I can get money from platform holders. I'm willing to give up exclusivity. I don't want to do that. I want to be flexible about what, but you know, there's hundreds of thousands of dollars you can get there, and I can easily finish the game on that amount of money if I do that. I don't know. Kickstarter, is that even a thing now? Like this year is pretty grim for Kickstarter. It's not even clear. People say, oh, you could do Kickstarter. I'm not sure. But clearly there's something there. There's a whole bunch of different ways to get money, all of which have strings attached. Whether it's printing 1 million t-shirts or, you know, begging your parents for money or whatever. You know, there's just different, and the guilt associated with that, if they even have it. So get more money. I hope I don't have to do that. It could happen to finish. Steam Early Access. So any conversation I have about business and SpyParty, people are like, what are you, stupid? Why don't you just put it on Steam Early Access? And it's true. Steam Early Access would instantly solve my burn rate problems and allow me to hire more help. If the following is true, which basically seems to be true for everybody, which is that 80% of your sales are on Steam and 20% are on your website, which is a 5x multiplier. So I sell close to enough copies on my website, so I'd sell 5x close to enough copies on my website, as on Steam, and that would instantly put me in the black and I'd be able to hire somebody. So, duh. And I'm also lucky in the sense that SpyParty is a very Steam game, like esports competitive, like hardcore, you know, very high skill ceiling, all of these things that make it's got a lot of style and attitude, like all of these things make it a very compatible game with the people who buy games on Steam. So what are you, stupid? Well, I'm gonna let you finish, but SpyParty has one of the best communities of all time, and I'm terrified of screwing up the community. This, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. This is a 14-page thread before Rami locked it about screen shake in Nuclear Throne on the Steam forums. They started complaining about it. He had at least I didn't read all 14 pages, I admit. But when I read it, like for the first 3 or 4 pages, he was incredibly accommodating and explaining how there's an artistic choice they're making to have screen shake in Nuclear Throne as part of the game we're making. If we change it, it's balanced. People are like, just put an option in, it's so fucking easy. What are you, fucking idiots? Just going off. And he's like, no, I mean, it's the game we're making. Like, we'd have to change the way the, like, you know, competitive maps work if we don't have it in there because, like, it's, you know, it would handicap people who aren't, you know, blah, blah, blah. Very calm. At the end of the thing, he locked the thread and put the option in. Like, I just don't want to deal with that right now. Like, you have to deal with that at some point, but, like, it's, like, my community is so positive. Like someone joins the lobby and people are like, hey man, how are you doing? You know, do you want some mentor games? Do you want some help? Like, oh, here's a pointer to this guy's stream, he's streaming right now, or this girl's doing this thing, and like whatever. It's like really diverse. It's just it's the best multiplayer competitive online community I've ever seen. And I spent a ton of effort helping make it that way, and I really don't want to screw it up. And like, I want to go on Steam. I really want to go on Steam, not just for the money, but for all the players. Like, I mean, I love people playing my game. It's great. I want a healthy community, but I want to take it slow. There's this truism in startups where you don't want to hire more people than you already have because it'll swamp your community, your culture. And I'm kind of treating it like that. I want to have enough people in my local community that are ambassadors that set tone, such that when I do broaden it, that it doesn't swamp, that the culture isn't just replaced. It's going to change, obviously. You bring more people into the game, things change. But I hope I can make it so it doesn't swamp the culture and replace it with like a Dota 2 or LoL style culture. I really don't want that. Now my game is very different. It's 1v1 instead of team. It's not, orcs beating up on each other. It's this very subtle thing. But there's just we've had people who come in who like treat it like an online competitive game. A shooter or something like that, and then people talk to them like, oh, we don't talk about it. We don't talk that way. Like here, you can ask me why I shot you. I'll just tell you. You don't have to rage quit and yell at somebody. And like they change. And so I want that to happen. Now, how you do that at 100 million players scale, I don't know. But I've talked to Steam about. I talked to Steam about maybe putting. Dota 2 had a hack in the back end of Steam to only allow a certain number of players in every day back in the early beta days. That's not actually a Steam feature, but I've been talking to them about maybe making that a Steam feature, so I could set it at like 50 copies a day or something like that, and just kind of slowly build it. There's a bunch of stuff I can talk. There's a bunch of stuff that I can hopefully do to kind of ease that in. Also, the game's not quite ready. It's not polished enough for Steam Early Access. You really kind of want to, like Nathan Bello was telling me, he feels like you really want to kind of go there right in your last year crunch. Like that's the optimal time. Steam Early Access is also, I didn't have time to put together a whole bunch of stuff. I got a bunch of links, but it's also, Early Access games have been, and by Early Access I mean mostly on Steam, have been getting a ton of flack lately. There's been a bunch of missteps, there's been a bunch of miscommunications, there's been some outright fraud. Like, it's just a really shaky time to go on Early Access, and so it's just really nerve-wracking. That said, I'll probably do it next year sometime. I'm hoping I'll have enough of the new user experience, new art, and stuff in that it'll actually not. I'm hoping I can get Valve to add the rate limiter or something like that, but we'll see. My current feeling is that it'll happen next year sometime. Okay, so the final thing is scope. I've reduced the scope a ton of times over the years. I used to have ideas for a kind of more behavioral version of the game versus what Frank called the clockwork version of the game, and I've kind of really embraced the clockwork version. It's working really well, and I can always make that other game later. I scope all the time, but there's this idea of this like hipster.com idea of this minimum viable product, which I think is just kind of nonsense for art and entertainment. Like, there's a game I want to make, right? It's got a certain critical mass. Like, there's a certain amount of stuff in the game that I want to make, and there's no minimum below that. So that's the minimum viable product. So like, yeah, I could could have shipped the shitty art, but like that's just not the game I want to make. So I just don't think it's really like that. Like, it's not compatible with my aesthetic goals at the very least. I think the more aesthetics you're trying to, the more kind of like more you're trying to push towards a very clear, specific place, game design-wise, I think the idea of minimum viable product is kind of flawed. Okay, fine, be that way. How much longer? Okay, well, first off, since we're all good producers, we're going to go through the task list. What's left to do? Well, we need 10 more characters, really actually 12, but let's ignore that for a second. John takes 9 months for 5 characters. You can do the math. Okay. Deeper core systems design. I have some really huge gameplay stuff I'm going to put in there soon, design stuff. The game is what I call about a 500-hour game right now, and I'm so lucky that I have that deep of a game, but I want it to be a 1,000-hour game before I'm done. And so I've got these things that are like going to really change the core game loop and really like kick it up a notch, hopefully, or ruin the whole thing. We'll see. I can always back it out. But again, that gets to this is the game I want to make. Like, I've got some more competitive, like kind of meta layer features, like Spectation's not in there. I've got this amazing replay system, but I don't have any replay database, so like everybody has to upload the replay files to the forums to exchange good games. Spawn copies so you can play a friend, things like that. There's a whole bunch of to make a multiplayer game that's kind of competitive nowadays in the sense of like that has that entire like kind of esporty competitive multiplayer that kind of cultivates that environment around it. There's just a lot of features you need to make that work, and it's kind of insane to be doing that as a single person, but whatever. More maps and missions, obviously. Although, I mean, this is like, I mean, a lot of these have things that are scopable on them. Like more maps and missions, like, I mean, Counter-Strike shipped with what, like 16 maps, and everybody only plays 3. So it's like, it's not, you just don't know what 3 in advance it's going to be, so you don't know which ones you should do. There's a couple system rewrites that I need to do. This is coding stuff, and like one benefit of being old and a good programmer is this stuff doesn't bother me at all. Like, okay, fine, I'll rewrite the pathing system, the animation system. I'm not worried about that at all. I'm way more worried about like the design stuff that I'm not as good at. I'm not worried about the animation. The producer would go nuts over that idea, but like that's just like I put much more care into and have much less self-confidence about the design stuff because it's compared to the programming, which I can do with my eyes closed. Other platforms, single player, like multiple spies, multiple stars, all kinds of stuff. I mean, some of that stuff's easily cuttable. I don't know. This is like stuff that's kind of in the big stuff. Okay, that didn't answer the question at all. All right, it's probably 2 years. But what does it even really? What does it even mean to finish a game nowadays? If you want to do this online multiplayer competitive game, like I mean, I'm going to be working on this game forever, and luckily I've got that infinite endurance thing because like I don't see why I wouldn't like add multiple spies and multiple snipers after a ship or all these more maps, more hats. Who knows? So the thing about it is that SpyParty is cash. So I have a really big mouth. I talk a ton of shit and have for the past 20 years about games, right? And I have somehow, magically, luckily, latched onto this game that is caching a bunch of those checks. It's about human behavior, it's about subtlety, it's deep, all of these things. It's like working out so well, and I'm so proud of how it's turning out, that there's no way I'm gonna like, cut it down to something just to get it out. Like I'm gonna do whatever it takes to finish making the game that I'm trying to make because I'm so proud of how it's coming out. And so the community, to finish up, the community saw that I was doing, I had tweeted out that I was gonna do this talk, and Crazy Kaylee, who's one of the top players, he's played 11,000 games. He has 365 hours of playtime, which doesn't sound like a lot until you realize that I don't measure this the wimpy way that Steam measured it. So Steam measures game time as how long the executable's running. This is how many games he's played at 3 minutes a pop. So this is a lot in terms of Steam game time. And he said, overall, I really like the game as developed at the pace it is, and I personally would be fine with the game going on in this fashion forever. I'm really curious to see how interesting this game can get when it's already quite deep. Now, obviously, you don't want to take your most hardcore Grognard fans and do exactly what they say, but at the same time, like, it's amazing, and I'm so lucky that there are players who have played hundreds of hours and tens of thousands of games of my game, and they still want it to keep going and evolving like that. So I'm super happy with that, and that's my talk. Thank you. I can take a couple questions, or we can wrap it up. Are there any questions? There don't have to be. Yes?
A question about your approach to systems design.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit, like you mentioned how you had several systems that you wanted to add.
Yeah. You want to go back to that slide?
A little bit about sort of how your process for adding those systems, and then sort of how long you sort of let them be before you
Right.
make decisions on them.
Okay, I'm going to repeat the question. So basically, about these core system design changes, how do I basically do the process for doing that? Like, how do I assume to choose which ones to do? How do I beta test them? To answer the second question first, I just treat the community as literally a beta test. I will put it in, play test it a little bit locally, and I will put it up there. They want to get it as early as possible. They want it to be totally broken and find the bugs. They love it, and that's awesome. So that is so huge. That's another thing that's a problem with Steam Early Access is that kind of attitude will go away as there's more and more people. Like, if I had 100,000 people playing the game as opposed to 10,000 people playing the game, that's a big change in that kind of thing. So as far as how I design those things, let's take dossiers, for example. Dossiers are, a lot of this stuff is not like, oh my gosh, genius, leap of incredible design creativity. It's like, dossiers are, every character should have a different behavior. So that's the obvious thing you first think of when you hear of SpyParty. But what happened was I thought of that a long time ago, because why wouldn't you make different characters have different behavior? And I was like, oh man, that's way too complicated. Like the game's already insanely hard to learn to play at a high level. So I'm going along in the game, I'm like, I'm probably not gonna be able to do this dossiers thing. That means, the general might drink too much, right? And so that means he's like very high probability he'll take drinks every time they're offered to him, things like that. Or he always wants to stand next to young women in a conversation, or the older lady always scares away the guy in the wheels. All things, just the intercombinations and things like that. So I was originally like, oh, it's just gonna be too complicated. Like no one's gonna be able to like deal with that level of complexity. And then LOL and Dota happened. And I was like, like, come on. It's like people will suck up like a sponge almost any level of complexity if the game is good underneath. And so what I realized is, like, unlike LoL and Dota where they just throw this giant block of characters at you and you're kind of like, it's not, the dossiers design has an interesting thing, which is that newbie spies won't know about these behaviors and they'll violate the dossier characteristics all the time, but newbie snipers won't know either. So until they'll both learn at the same time, like, wow, he rejected a drink, I should highlight him, And so it's got a much easier ramp than something like LoL or Dota where it's like, which of these 400 characters do I pick? So I'm optimistic. I mean, the truth of the matter is, everything I've thrown at SpyParty, it is a sponge for game design. Like, everything has worked. Like, I put drinks in because I was going to do a poison the drink mission because it's a spy game. Of course, you have to be able to poison a drink, right? I haven't gotten around to poisoning the drink yet because the mission's hard. It's got to have a bar, and like, how do you get the drink? There's a bunch of complicated things associated with it, but I added drinks, and boom, there was just gameplay immediately. Like, if you're holding a drink on this side, you can't bug the ambassador on that side. So now all of a sudden there's just, do I take a drink now or not? And then a fan suggested an idea, there should be a guest list on the waiter's tray, and now you can take a drink and steal the guest list at the same time, so now you have to watch the waiter and who has a drink after it's gone. Like, there's just tons of gameplay, and I think it's one of these things, like, I don't know about you guys, but like, when I look at The Sims, I'm like, how come no one has cloned The Sims? Like, it's an infinite pile of money. You'd think just from a raw greed standpoint, there would be a million Sims clones out there. But there aren't. I think partly because like people make the games they want to play, right? And most people who are developers don't want to play The Sims. But what I found, I mean, no, Sims developers do. I mean, I think The Sims is interesting. But what I found is that like there's gameplay laying all over the floor when you have human beings in a room interacting, like without giant Space Marine weapons and stuff like that. There's plenty of gameplay there too. I mean, Counter-Strike's one of my favorite games of all time. Not that there's Space Marines in it, but you know what I mean, shooting people. But there's just so much. It's so unexplored. I hate that term, blue ocean, but whatever. There's so much around. So I can basically add in. So recommendations was a fan-suggested idea. So just to give you another example from that thing. Recommendations was a fan, one of the players was like, okay, so you should be able to, in a conversation, say the statues are really cool, and then everyone will increase their likelihood of going to the statues, which of course will flood the statues, so the sniper's like, shit, what's going on over there? Or at the really elite levels, what will happen is like, wow, everybody's at statues now. Who's not at statues who was in the conversation that everybody else who's at statues was there? So it's like boom, boom, boom. And so it's just like so many, there's just so much stuff you can do once you've got a mechanic. And I'm really lucky that the core game design can absorb that much gameplay. But it's like so the answer in how I do these core system things is like, I come up with the ideas and I type them in and they work. I don't know. It's just crazy. Yeah. One short question.
So earlier in the talk, you talked about player fatigue. There are like 200-hour players bouncing out.
Yeah.
So like the retention problem and keeping those people. But you also talked a lot about like how the community is really great, and it seems like community is sort of like a common solution for
Right.
for like increasing retention and like good people to like taking on roles outside of like the core gaming mechanics.
Yeah.
Commentators or guild leaders or whatever, and that's how they like.
Well, so what I found, to repeat the question is like, you've got people who, bouncing is like, I use the term bouncing for people who have like played 2 hours of the game, right? And there's like, okay, cool, I'm done, or I'll come back later when it's a little bit more finished. Moving on is what I use for the really long-term players who they go on and do different stuff, right? And you were saying as community is oftentimes is an answer for stickiness at that level, and that's true. In fact, we have multiple of these multi-thousand game players who hang out in the forums and chat. They just don't play as much anymore. And so that's still a good thing. I love having them around. They're answering questions. They'll be on the stream chat and answering questions that way and stuff like that. But I'd also love it if they play, and so I'm not sure how to get them playing is what I guess I'm saying. The community's great. There are long-term old players who are in the community. I mean, some people just leave, some people fade away just because that just happens naturally, right? But I'm not sure how to keep those people playing, and I don't mean keep them playing like I must manipulate them into playing. I want, I'm kind of hoping the dossiers, recommendations, interrogation stuff will get people back in because it's going to so change the flavor of the game, it's going to add another layer on top of the game. But I don't know, I almost, if you can identify those people, you want to not spend them all at the same time because they are finite in some sense. And I don't know, I'm not exactly sure how even to conceptualize what to do about them. I'm just glad that they like my game, basically. So I'm just like, whenever you want to come or go, it's totally cool. We'll be here if you want to come back, is the way I express it. So, okay, I guess we're done. Thank you.